So, I appreciate that introduction, Ryan, and it wasn't that long ago, actually, that we were standing on this stage back in, was it February? Something like that, yeah. So, 35,000 miles later in 99 counties, I'm bringing to you all a little bit more in terms of the listening tour that I've finished, and it's great to be here. A couple things I wanted to hit. One is the idea that the Secretary of Agriculture is really a position that belongs to all of Iowa and all Iowans, right? I mean, it's the words I've sort of come up with is maybe the Secretary of Food, Land, and Water, because the mission is really broad, right? And whether we're talking about clean water or flooding, which relates to soil health, or healthy foods we can eat in Iowa, issues of hunger, poverty, that relates to this office. New markets, I mean, we're a global powerhouse, right? I mean, we're only number 2 behind the state of California in terms of our agricultural output. And a lot of that is focused on, world markets. But one of the things that I would like to do to rebuild Iowa agriculture is to focus on Iowa markets and Midwestern markets and United States markets, 80 million people within a day's drive of Iowa. 80 million. 3.2 million here in Iowa. The U.S. market alone is 1.5 trillion. It's one of our largest markets in the world. And so let's focus there. What do I want to do? My high button points, first of all, clean water, right? Does anyone care about clean water? Yeah, that's not an urban versus rural issue. That's an Iowa issue. We gotta bring water flows, up and down and around the state. So we gotta figure out how to address water at scale. This is really the issue that I want to bring as a systems and a markets thinker. We get into this big shootout as to whether it needs to be regulatory or voluntary, and I would argue that's really not the right way to be thinking about this, because even if we had a regulated driven solution, we'd still have to figure out what to do. And figuring out what to do is a lot about how to address our agriculture in terms of systems, A system is our soil. That's a system. And the biology of the soil has been degraded to the point where the soil doesn't behave in the way we need it to. So it can't infiltrate water, it can't hold and store water, and that hurts us during a drought, and that hurts us during a flood. And the system is so big, 23 million acres, that if we don't pay attention to that soil, we see the impacts. We see the flooding, we see the drought. So water quality will be one of my priorities. And by the way, if anyone is just curious, since my opponent came to office he's been a bureaucrat, I would describe, almost 10 years in that office. And guess where he came from? Before Idols. Does anybody know? Monsanto. Yeah, does anyone know about Monsanto? Yeah, one of the most notorious chemical companies in the country. Just with the Roundup alone, that is a $16 billion and counting legal liability related to Roundup. And that's just maybe the most recent of some of Monsanto's more famous chemicals, including Agent Orange and DDT and so forth. And so somebody who I think comes through that background, that lobbyist position, you come to that office with wearing rose-colored glasses, right? I mean, and so I think part of the problem is he's incapable of understanding the size and magnitude of the water quality problems, which I would consider a crisis, really. If you look at the numbers, the nutrient reduction loading is going up 30%, over 100% over longer periods of time. The wetlands that are impacted, 25% of our wetlands, 55% of our rivers are impaired, 67% of our lakes are impaired. And with climate change, these numbers are going to get worse unless we come up with a systematic and scaled response. It's not doing, random happy projects. And he can talk about a lot of the good partnerships that have been developed, including one I led through our soil and water district as an elected soil and water commissioner. I led up what's called now a batch and bundle approach to saturated buffers, where we're not doing those one at a time. We're doing that 50 and 100 at a time. And now we're teaching the other counties how to do this. And my opponent has embraced this. I'm glad he's embraced it. It's important that he does. But I would also like to remind him to give credit where credit's due. And he was running around for 10 years. He did not come up with that idea. So, and then we need to, I think the idea of farming as an economic development activity is really important. And we have farming that's going, it's getting bigger and bigger, faster tractors, bigger farms. And that's all about the scale and the commodity end of the system, the corn, the beans, the hogs, for example. But we got to figure out how to support farmers at mid-scale, right? 2 to 100 to 1,000 acres, and then down the entry level at 1, 5, 10 acres. And if you haven't, how do you get into agriculture typically in Iowa today? Yeah, you inherit or you're born into it. Well, can you think of any other industry that the only way you get into it is to be born into it, right? And that's a game of musical chairs. As these farms get bigger and the tractors get bigger and faster, there are fewer of those seats unless we figure out how to support farming at mid-scale, which could be in local processing, actually having some of that. And down at the entry level, we got to build, I think, the equivalent of business parks for farming. I call them farm parks. And you bring in the infrastructure, you bring in the water, the power, the storage, the processing, the branding, and the marketing, and you help somebody get in on a 1 acre and 5 acres. They're not doing the commodity farming that the people with the big tractors are. This is an entirely different kind of farming that we can do, that other nations in the world, the Dutch are famous for doing some of this now, and some of this will be indoors. So, the idea of supporting farmers at different scales, and let's make Iowa the Silicon Valley of farming. I would like to do that. Can we do that? So we're growing this mix of healthy foods in my vision. I'm not tearing down the commodity systems. It's important to what we do. It's foundational to our economy. But we got to diversify. We got to add that resiliency. A couple of other things I wanted to mention. I heard this a lot out on the trail. Sensible spray enforcement. That gets back to that Monsanto background. I think that, there's no such thing as a bad spray. And so the idea that we've got to figure out how to have sensible spray policies that are actually enforced, because from what I'm hearing, that's not happening. And one of the consequences of when we don't have sensible spray policies is we then have infringements on neighboring farms and other third parties, and then we begin to see maybe some of the impacts on biology, right? Do we have any impacts on biology we might be able to point to? The monarch butterfly, perhaps? So, to me, that's like the indicator of DDT in the bald eagle, right? So we got to have sensible spray enforcement. Anybody care about puppy mills? That's part of my office too, and we don't have a sensible approach to puppy mills because there's no indemnification fund. If you find some of these habitual violators, it's the equivalent to me of like drunk drivers. It's like our policy is, well, we have these drunk drivers driving around, but we really don't want to shut them down because we don't really have a good way to shut them down. And so the puppy mill violators, habitual, we look the other way, hope it will go away. And then the very worst ones, then they blow up and they go into the news, and then the sheriff's department or somebody has to come in and figure out, well, okay, how do we actually shut these down? And where do the animals go? So that's what's missing, is where do the animals go? We need an indemnification fund to have that money so we can then shut down the worst ones. And it's probably a small number of the very worst. If we just had a common sense approach to how we shut them down, I think a lot of our puppy mill situation would be solved. The last thing I'm going to talk about is eminent domain for carbon pipelines. Anybody care about that? Okay, some clapping. And I don't think the carbon pipelines qualify for eminent domain. They're not a public use. Common sense, right? It's not a road I can drive on. It's not a public utility that everybody benefits from. It's really benefiting a few people. So if we want to have these pipelines, then I think, for me, there are three standards. One is voluntary. They need to be voluntary. Mid-American has voluntary. They don't use eminent domain when they're putting up the wind towers. Then I think the idea of fairness is important. And fairness to me means you don't get a one-time payment, you get an annual payment if you voluntarily agree to do this. And the annual payment ought also cover the county that's impacted. Why does the county get covered? Well, now they have a risky, they're bearing a new risk with this risky pipeline. We're at the pipeline with the liquid product running through it, which is heavier than air, and if it gets out of the pipeline, we have an example, right, Ryan, from Mississippi, where that thing rolled over the landscape like a blanket. And what do we use carbon dioxide for in livestock? Does anybody know? That's how we euthanize our animals. So we've got a nice little euthanasia tool right there. And people say, oh, it's crazy that the pipeline that would be built so safely could never fail. Well, look at how we've had some of these failures. You know, do we have intense rainfall here in Iowa? Well, what happens if we have a really intense rainfall in an area where the pipeline is, and all of a sudden you have the soil shifts underneath that pipeline, and then all of a sudden it's not supported, and boom, now you've got a fracture in the pipeline. So you better have some really good safety technology. That's the third standard, and there better be shutoffs not every 20 miles. I don't know what the right answer would be, but you better be able to shut off that pipeline real quickly. All right, so just in closing, you know, my values, as Ryan was sort of talking about, I'm probably a non-conventional politician. You know, inquiry, I operate on inquiry. That's how, as a soil and water commissioner, I made some of these innovative leaps. It's because I ask a lot of questions first before coming to some conclusions. I use rationality. You know, there's another novel concept. Humility, the idea we don't all know the answer, so let's listen and let's show some humility. And also the idea of patience. You know, I think we need to act with a sense of urgency, and we need to be focused in what we do as the secretary, but we also have to take time to make sure we're making good decisions. That's part of the patience. And then we're bringing people along, right? That's patience. And then, you know, last is faith. And faith could do many forms. Faith in the Iowa people. I think if we all get behind a vision of where we want to go with our agricultural system in this state, we can be a leader in the world for sustainability and resiliency in rebuilding Iowa, particularly rural Iowa. 70 of our counties are in population decline. Why is that happening? Well, that's happening because we have an agricultural system that's scaling, and through the musical chairs, there's fewer and fewer seats left. So there's nothing for people to do unless you're driving the big tractor, you know, and that might be that's the birth lottery. So I think that, you know, those values are important. I'm going to represent all Iowans, and I'm going to bring independence, integrity to the markets, and systems thinking, a sense of urgency. We got to get our act together. You know, we've been screwing around for 10 years, thinking this is a $10 or $15 million a year problem that we can just kind of wish away. Climate change is going to make it worse because that intense weather, that's when the soil moves. You know, we're a global leader in soil loss in this country, 145 million tons per year. That's $3 billion a year. And our governor, you know, we have about an $8-9 billion budget. So that's a third of our budget every year going down the river. A model of excellence for the world. That's what I want to do. This department, it covers so many different aspects of human health and environmental health and our economy. We got to think about this as being foundational to what we do, not just sort of oh yeah, we got to throw some money over at that department. And then the last part is inviting Iowa and Iowans, I think, to help rebuild Iowa through an Iowa Farm Bill. I'm going to be talking about that. I think we'll have a press release on that next week. That, you know, the idea, and we've had a couple other states that have done this. Pennsylvania, I'm sort of modeling this after. We have the federal Farm Bill. This would be the Iowa Farm Bill. This would be the Farm Bill of what is it that Iowans want to do? Not big ag, not a few companies telling us all what to do. This is what Iowans want to do. And guess what? We have to do, if we want to move the needle, we have to do it through teamwork. Right? The Mennonites and the Amish, you watch them. they're pretty good at teamwork. But the idea somehow that farmers operating or ag landowners operating on their own to build markets, that's not how you build markets. You build markets working together. So that's part of this vision. The Iowa Farm Bill would be the organizing structure to how to do this. I couldn't do it on my own. It'd be the legislature and the governor would have to buy into this. But hopefully you all could help me sort of promote that idea, move that forward. How can you help me? In the same way the other candidates, I think, talk us up, try to help us differentiate. what we're, how we match up to our opponents. And my opponent, he's pro eminent domain. He is really a status quo candidate, in my opinion. He's not a systems thinker. He's a nice person. I've got yard signs in the back. That's helpful. Literature, there's some postcards. If you want to send some postcards out to people, that's helpful too. Social media, follow all the social medias. That's pretty much. Really appreciate your time today. Act Blue, if you want to hit the Act Blue button, that's always important for me, as well as everybody else. But again, appreciate you all being here today. We got, 3 weeks from Tuesday. So I'm looking forward to the end of the run here, and reach out anytime.